those things.
I forgot to take my background off. Forgot to do that.
One of those things.
I forgot to take my background off. Forgot to do that. That would be funny, wouldn't it? If I actually fell off the mountain. Oh no. Okay, I see YouTube's working.
It's not safe, is it?
No, there's about a 15-second delay.
It's a long way down. I don't know if y'all have ever been up on Mount Arbel, but it is a long way down. But that road that you can see in the background, that's a major ancient, it's built over an ancient road. And this is up in the Galilee. So definitely Yeshua would have walked that road. That would have been something he would have done. Okay, well, Shabbat Shalom. Yeah, they're saying don't fall off the mountain. I'll do my best, lest I dash my foot against a stone. Okay, so welcome to all of those who are joining the live stream right now. And what we're going to do is we're going to look at the two B's of magic. And this is actually going to be a two-part thing. I'm going to do half of it this week and then half of it next week, because next week really just continues the story of what happens. But of course, our two B's are going to be our two sorcerers. Balak, which means destroyer. And then, of course, Bilam. And we've done more in-depth studies on Bilam in the past. What I want to do in this session is maybe give an overview of what's happening in this realm of the two sorcerers and why they would think it would be okay to try to curse Israel, even though they're, clearly they've got the message they shouldn't. And how many of you have ever known you shouldn't do something and you did it anyway? Because you thought maybe, oh, that's a sign I should, We tend to look around for signs that don't exist when we really want to do something. And so this is what happens to Bilam. He knows he shouldn't, but, if Adonai has changed his mind in the past, and it appears he has, you can talk yourself into making it okay. So I'm going to share my screen. Of course, Balak means destroyer. So if you're thinking prophecy, you're already making some connections. If I want to know about the destroyer, then I'm about to find out some very specific things about how the destroyer works. So who were they? Our two B's. Oh, and by the way, the title is Here Comes the Bribe. Because that's how fortune telling works. That's how sorcery works. There's a payoff for the person. And we say, well, I would never do sorcery for pay, but we do little things in our lives for a payoff. We will do little compromises here and there because there's a different kind of payoff. It may not be money. What if it's attention? What if it's accolades? What if it's comfort? What if it's that thing we always wanted? We can pick on the parents a little bit. What do you want for your children? Do you want your children to be admired? Do you want them to be popular? Would you cut a corner here or there in order for that to happen? You see, it can happen on a huge scale, like a sorcerer, but it can also happen in our personal lives. You know, how many times have we shared a word of Torah with somebody and they expressed admiration? Oh, that's wonderful. That's beautiful. I've never heard that before. Are we reading the same Bible? How did you get that smart? And you're like, well, I'm not really that smart. You just have to study, you know, but it made us feel good. And that's where people get carried away nowadays. They get into the Torah. They start learning a lot. They can speak just enough Hebrew to be dangerous and make mistakes. Because if you didn't know the Hebrew at all, you could make a mistake with it. And you can hear some really bizarre interpretations. People, you know, struggling, trying to learn Hebrew, trying to apply it, trying to use rules of hermeneutics. And the thing is, we just fumble and bumble around a lot as we're learning. And I think the Father accepts that like any other father would. He says they're trying. You know what? When you take the training wheels off, you're going to wreck the bike at least once, right? And we wreck our bikes a lot as we try to figure it out. And so I think those mistakes that we make, we have to see it like Abraham. Abraham's 10 tests. Would you say he 100% passed every one? No, but he did. Even when you fail a test, you might have actually passed it, because when you got through it, you said, man, I really messed up on that. Well, you just passed. You just passed. You made a mistake. You recognize it. I'm going to try harder next time, and I'll see it coming much sooner next time. That was loyalty to the promise. That's what Abraham had. He had faith. He had loyalty to the promise, even when he made mistakes. And so don't see oh man, I failed on this one. No, if you use that for a recalibration the next time, you passed it. That's what it was supposed to do in you. You didn't know you had that weakness. Now you know. Now you can move forward and start working on it. So a lot of times we beat ourselves up. Oh man, I messed up on that test. Yeah, but that's how you're going to pass it. You're going to correct it. So who are these two beasts? The sages believed that both Balak and Bilam were sorcerers, not just Bilam. They believed that Balak was the greatest magician in Moab, or Moab. If you live in Utah, right? It's Moab. But scripture calls him Balak ben Zippor. And they believe that because it's kind of characteristic of a certain type of magician that existed at that particular time in history. And what they would do, these sorcerers or magicians, whatever you want to call them, rather than calling on the Holy One for assistance and whatever the problem was, they would tap into these darker spiritual forces, which for us are death. They're out there, they're doing their jobs, whatever their job is. It's not really our job to figure out what they're doing, why they're doing it, or to try to tap into it. We keep our hands off of those sorts of things. But what the sorcerer would do is tap into that, because there is a power there. And they would tap into the forces of what's called tumah. And you can hear the word tameh. And that word tameh in Leviticus is impurity. It can be ritual impurity. It can be other sorts of home-based impurities. There's things that disqualify you from going into the temple, and there's things you have to maintain from day to day in your home. But they'll all touch this realm of tameh, and how you manage it is what's important. It's not the fact that you would be tameh. Everybody. In fact, that's what today, if you go to Israel, you'll notice everybody will sit in any seat on the bus or on the plane, and you say, well, you know, if we're maintaining the laws of purity, then why will men sit just anywhere in a public place? And their assumption at this point is, right now we're all closed up in a particular state of tameh. You have to manage the things that are within your home but there's certain things out in public that aren't going to be fixed until Messiah comes. Because at that point, Jerusalem will be returned to a state where it says even the bells of the horses and your everyday eating utensils, your plates, forks, knives, all that, it will have the same level of purity as something that's used in the temple. But for right now, they say, well, like we're all closed up in a particular state of tameh. And so what they would do is they would tap into these unclean forces. If we've ever wondered what happened between Malachi and Matthew, where all of a sudden unclean spirits pop up in the Gospels. And it's like, well, where was it talking about unclean spirits? I missed that chapter. It was the book of Leviticus for the most part, is where it taught you about unclean spirits. You just didn't realize what you were reading. You were reading about how to manage your states of tameh, because if you did that, presumably you're never going to have a problem with an unclean spirit, because you're not basically opening the windows and doors and saying, come on in. If you manage it, remember, not the fact that you could be in a state of ritual impurity, but the fact that you manage it biblically. And at this point, it's mainly the laws of family purity that husbands and wives would practice. But what they would do, they would tap into these forces that are forbidden to us, and they would manipulate those forces. And this particular type of magic that was practiced, they would take the image of a bird, which is Sipur, which is where you get Balak ben Sipur. And they would make a gold head, a silver beak, copper wings, and then they would assemble each of these at a particular time of day. There was a time and a place for everything in magic. And that's what you'll notice. In magic, there's always a very close parallelism to that which is holy. It's sometimes they will do something that's just completely outrageous to us, but frequently they will have the same things going on. They will have ritual objects. They will have their holy days. They will have particular incantations or words, which is what we're all about, the word, right? There's, various ritual things that we're taught to do in scripture. And so it's not a clear departure. Sometimes it's very close to that which is holy. And so if you think of Daniel's vision of the beast, which is the man, and he's got the 4 different types of metal, you can see at least 3 of these metals representing the beast as they assemble these little bird images. And so they would do it at a specific time of day. And the last thing they would put on this image is the tongue of a living bird. I know, yuck. But it would eventually, after this procedure, it says they would place the bird on a sill of an open window. It faced the sun by day, the moon by night. And then 7 days later, they said the bird's tongue would make a tinkling sound. And then the magician pierced the tongue with a golden needle, and the bird began, or it appeared, it didn't talk, it appeared to come alive and to talk. And this is exactly what happens with the image of the beast in the book of Revelation. It appears to come alive and to talk, and it can deceive a lot of people because it looks like the thing has been resurrected from the realm of death. They said that was the thing with the golden calf. The psalm tells us that they exchanged their glory for a calf that ate grass. And they say these magicians, Jannes and Jambres, that are mentioned in the letter to Timothy, these Egyptian magicians came out with them, and they were able to intervene in the procedure of forming the calf. And so once it was formed, it appeared to eat grass and make sounds. So when we read in the book of Revelation that the beast appears to come to life and starts deceiving people, there's a Torah background, and then there's a cultural background based on this particular type of magic, of making the image appear to come to life. There's even you'll see this same thing in mythology. What was the Greek myth where the Pygmalion, where he makes the image of the woman and then She appears to come to life, and then you have a musical called My Fair Lady. But it's kind of an old thing based on an old form of magic. And they think this is Balak's specialty. That's why they called him Balak ben Sipur. And this will actually appear to work. That's how it deceives people. It will have an appearance that there's life in it. And if you're not completely grounded in the word, then it could deceive you. It's possible. It can appear to have life. But the problem with sorcery is it doesn't get the whole picture. It's like they say with Pharaoh, his magicians told him that the deliverer would arise out of the Nile. So what does he do? He has all the baby boys thrown into the Nile. Well, that's not a full picture, Pharaoh. Just you're getting part of it. But the sorcerers will give you enough information that you'll think, wow, that's right on track. You know, my horoscope really is true. I can read my horoscope and this really will come to pass in my life. You might go to the carnival fortune teller and that person tells you something that's spot on accurate. And you're thinking, wow, they really are, you know, able to tap in there. Like they're tapping in, but they cannot see full picture. They will give you just enough to deceive you. That's how they work. And that's why the kings and nobles of ancient times kept these magicians on staff, because even if they couldn't give you the full picture, they could give you enough that you could try to outwit your enemies. And so you could see King Nebuchadnezzar kind of putting Daniel in that category. He says, okay, Daniel, you've told me that, you know, my kingdom's going to fall. Tell you what, I'll make the whole image gold. And that way my kingdom will never fall. It won't fall to Greece. It won't fall to the Medes and Persians. It won't fall to the Romans. I'll just see what he's trying to do here. He said, you're just like every other magician. You're giving me part of the picture, but I can end around. You know, I can run another play here and get around this defense. And so they think it's because of this bird divination that Balak saw that the power that was dwelling with Israel could completely destroy his power. He's just tapping into stuff that can eventually overpower him, because it will snap back on you. You play with Ouija boards, you play with, what do they call them, tarot cards. You start playing with the Harry Potters. I know we sound like fanatics. Oh, it's just a kid's story. No, it's not. It's planting seeds in very young minds. And so there's a reason we're told to stay completely away from that stuff, because there's stuff out there that we are not equipped to deal with. It's in the realm of death. And so they say he could see that what was with Israel was way bigger and way stronger than what was with him. So in his mind, he rationalizes, you know, each kingdom has its spiritual ruler. Just say the Prince of Persia, where the angel says, I had to fight with the Prince of Persia. And then he says, the Prince of Greece is coming. So there's these other entities that have charge over certain parts of the world and the nation specifically. And he thought, well, they're just like every other nation. You know, you can circumvent that power if you know just the right spell or words or whatever. And what he didn't acknowledge was that Israel in the clouds of glory was under his personal, the Holy One's personal protection. They're not like the other nations of the world. Remember, they're a nation that dwells apart. They're a nation that dwells separately. So as long as they're living in clouds of glory and they're living in obedience, they're living in that unity of the tents that Balaam prophesies, those princes of the powers of the air, they don't have control over Israel. You're just banging your head against a wall. Unless you say, well, there's still one more thing. That's the condition. They have to live in obedience. What if I can bait them into rebelling and they lose the cloud? They lose the divine protection. And here's the problem with magic and sorcery and cursing and so forth. Evil does imitate life and righteousness, but it'll eventually turn on you. If we're talking about these unclean spirits that Yeshua was talking about, he would cast them out of people, and then he would talk about them. He would say, if you cast an unclean spirit out of a person, and then this thing's going to go walk the dry places, and they'll say, now, where was the window open last time? Who left the door open? You know, a thief going down the street, he's going to look in the cars and see which one has a key in it, right? Which people don't have keys anymore, but in the good old days when there were keys in cars, they would steal the one that had the key in it if they could. I mean, you know, who wants to break the steering column? Not that we know anything about that, but prison always pops up, doesn't it? You want to make it easy, because if you drive up in a car that has a broken steering column, they know it's stolen. And so they're looking for the easy theft. That's the problem. These things, if you leave the door open, they'll say, well, I'll go right back where I came from, except this time he says he brings 7 things more wicked than himself. That's why we have the book of Leviticus, so we can manage these states properly. And if there's nothing replaced, he says, you sweep the house clean. Okay, for now it's clean. But what if you don't put the word back in there? You know, we talked about the prayers, the fragrant incense, the furniture of the word. You have to start furnishing yourself, especially with books like Leviticus. That's why you went to a priest if you had any sign of leprosy at all. If it was in your house, your garment, your saddle, your skin, you went to the priest. He could ask you questions about what's going on in your life. And we can probably go back and pinpoint what's happening. You had to go to an expert, and he could say, okay, you need to study this. You need to incorporate this in your life. And that's how you're going to close the door. You know, people make fun of the book of Leviticus like it's the most boring thing ever. I'm like, it's the most life-giving thing ever. It's there you learn to love your neighbor as yourself. There's nothing cleaner than that, right? So, we know that evil is going to imitate life and righteousness. And so if you see that Moses has a sidekick, he has Aaron. He says, okay, Moses, you talk, and then Aaron is going to transmit the message. You're going to see like this little unholy union in Balak and Bilam, because you have Bilam who has the words. He has the curses, but you have Balak who knows when and where. And see, it's just like if you study scripture, there's certain things you need the words, but you also need to know when and where. You need to know it's the Shabbat. You need to know it's Passover. You need to know it's Sukkot. You need to know it's Shavuot. You need to know it's Jerusalem. You need to know it's the Temple Mount. There's certain things that are specific to those times and places. And so in the realm of evil, they also have that. They know, because they're tapping into those powers, they know the specific place, they know the specific time, and they have words. But remember, this is all incomplete. They're playing, they're out of their league and they don't know it. Because these things will eventually turn on you. Let's say you get an unclean spirit. What's it want to do? It needs a body to enjoy what it wants to do. It doesn't have a body, it's a spirit. So if a body wants to experience, say, alcohol, if a body wants to experience driving really fast down the interstate, whatever it is you might need a body to do, they have to have a host. But because, again, we weren't created to be together, there's an element of death that's in there that entity is not going to realize. It's going to use the enormous power of the soul. People usually attribute to the spirit a power that is actually in the soul. That's why we did workbook 4, so people could tell the difference. And a lot of times it's just knowing which Hebrew word is being used right here. But it doesn't understand when it attaches itself to that soul, which comes packaged in a body, that if it does all the things it wants to do, it's going to kill the host. If it does the drugs, it'll eventually kill the host. If it does the alcohol, it will eventually kill the host. If it is addicted to, let's say, pride is one of the things that goes with that. If you're, there's such a thing as narcissistic traits, but there's also a disorder. And if you've ever run into one of those, you can become addicted to yourself. Eventually, what will it do? It will separate you from everybody because nobody can stand to be around you. And so whatever it's introducing, the ultimate end of it is separation or death. But it doesn't tell you that. It makes you think you're having fun. It makes you think you're being entertained. It makes you feel that ecstasy of the soul, whatever that may be to you. Likewise, in Revelation, we've got a false prophet working in tandem with the beast and the serpent. So we've got a mouthpiece here. They're trying to imitate that which is holy. So they believe that Bilam was descended from Lavan. He came from Aram Naharaim, which leads you back to where Lavan was, or Laban. I don't know if you've ever noticed, but if you spell Lavan backward, it's Nabal. It's, remember Abigail's husband, King David and his little band of men, they've been protecting their flocks for a while. And so at the time of sheep shearing, which is usually also a time of debauchery in ancient times, David sends and he says, could we have a little something to eat here? Could we share in the feast? We've been helping you out. And Nabal's stingy. He says, no. And so David's going to go kill him. And Abigail goes out and she intervenes. And then, of course, Nabal ends up dying anyway. He was stingy. What do we know about Lavan? Stingy. No matter how hard Jacob worked for his sheep and his wives and his camels and his goats and his donkeys and everything that he earned, at the end, when Lavan chases him down, he says, it's all mine. You see how that narcissism, like who could stand to be around somebody like that? And so they even say that Lavan didn't have sons until Jacob arrived. And so even his sons were in the merit of having a righteous person in his household. But what would have been passed down through the sons? A feeling that Jacob had robbed them of something that was rightfully theirs. And that does sound like a bit of a stretch, but we know Lavan was greedy. We know Nabal was greedy. And what do we know about Bilam? He was greedy. I'll do it. No, you can't do it. Well, what if I just went and I didn't curse them? It's kind of like, it's this. He's edging closer and closer to what he wants to do. Thinking, if God's changed his mind about something once, remember Abraham's bargaining? He says, okay, I won't destroy it if there's this many people. Then this, well, he's been willing to change his mind before. He could change his mind on this one. He changed his mind when Abraham was going to offer Isaac. I mean, that sort of stuff gets around the neighborhood. Maybe he'll change his mind on this if he'll just let me go. Once I get there, maybe he'll let me. Kids never do that, do they? You tell them they can't have something, and they're like, well, could I just go to the mall with you? Could I just get closer to the store? But it's wages. As you read through the narrative, you realize it's the wages of cursing that's drawing Bilam, even though the first message is don't. And if you rebel against don't, then he's liable to let you go in the path you've chosen. And that's the danger. If he's clearly told us no, and how would we know that? His word. If it clearly says in his word, don't do that, or clearly do, and we clearly decide we're not going to, then we might be led to believe that hey, he wasn't serious about that. He changed his mind. He really doesn't care what I put in my mouth. Well, he's not that serious about these images. It's fine to kind of, read things about idols or to play with idols. He didn't change his mind about cursing Israel, and he never will. I don't know why the world doesn't get that generation after generation, but they just never seem to process the fact he's not going to relent and he's not going to let you curse Israel. You might kill him, but he's not going to allow you to curse them. It just can't stick. It just won't. And that's what happens. Balak means destroyer. What drew Balaam to the destroyer? What he wanted to do. That's your reward. That's your payoff. Those are your wages. It doesn't have to be money. It doesn't have to be riches. Again, it can be attention. It can be esteem. It can be being popular. It can be being seen as a winner, a smart person, a great athlete, whatever it is that is your bait. We all have a different, thing that's going to bait us in. And it's that greediness of the soul that it appeals to. What do you want? He'll give it to you. You think. So we've got this pattern of tests. And it connects Lavan, Jacob, Abraham, and Balaam. And we know that we need a minion of 10 for public prayer, right? It goes back to Abraham bargaining down to 10. But 10 is also the number of testing. Tests come in tens. And what we don't want to happen is to turn our test into our testing him. We could see in Numbers 14:22 an example where it does happen. He says, certainly all the people who have seen my glory and my signs, which I performed in Egypt and in the wilderness, yet they have put me to the test these 10 times and have not listened to my voice. How do you really fail a test? Don't listen. Don't listen to his voice. Kids, that's something to remember. If you want to fail the test, don't listen to your parents. What if you listen and do what you want to anyway? Well, you should be feeling bad when you do it anyway. You should leave that door open for repentance. It says in Deuteronomy 8:3, the key to this is humility. It says, he humbled you, let you go hungry, fed you with manna, which you did not know. Manna is words, right? Yeshua is the bread of heaven. He's the living word. He's going to give you words which you did not previously experience. Maybe you read them, but you didn't internalize them. Would you guys say that today there is manna that you know? You know it. And maybe you read it 100 times before you knew it. And then you internalized it. He wants you to be hungry, because when you're hungry is when you begin to internalize it. If you're not hungry, you won't eat. Well, some of us will when we're not hungry. But he says, your fathers didn't even know this manna. In order to make you understand that man shall not live by bread alone, but man shall live on everything that comes out of the mouth of the Lord. So you have to listen to the voice, which means you're listening to what comes out of his mouth. We go to his word. That's what comes out of his mouth. And we have to heed that. And so Abraham was given 10 tests to find out, would Abraham listen to the voice? And remember I said, it's not whether you feel like you 100% passed the test. It's how you went through that test. And at the end, in your evaluation, you say, didn't do as well as I thought. I've got to correct the course. That's passing the test. Not getting it right 100% of the time. It's learning through those tests. And he always gives us opportunities to rectify. If we didn't do so well on that question, guess what? It's on the makeup test. So the 10 tests are for your hearing ability. Bilam is going to have 10 tests to see if he will listen. He didn't hear the first time, and he didn't hear the next 9 times either. But this is the hearing test that we all have to take. He's going to give us a manna that our fathers did not know. And I think in our generation, this is particularly salient. We are hearing this manna in a different way than maybe our parents or our grandparents heard it, going back many generations all the way to the 1st century. There's parts of the words that they did not internalize in their generation. He says, I want to feed you with that. There's going to be something in your generation you're going to have to rise to. So Bilam is being tested. We know that Lavan never internalized the words he was hearing. His daughters did, but Lavan never did. And so Lavan ends up testing Adonai. How do we know that Abraham passed his hearing tests? Genesis 26:5 says, I will multiply your descendants as the stars of heaven, and will give your descendants all these lands, and by your descendants all the nations of the earth shall be blessed, because Abraham obeyed me and fulfilled his duty to me and kept my commandments, my statutes, and my laws. Where it says obey there, it's Shema, heard, obeyed, just like when we say this Shema. When you hear something, you obey it. So did Abraham receive the same set of commandments, statutes, and laws as Moses? Probably in a seed form, but did he have a tabernacle? No, he had Sarah's tent. He had a tiny tabernacle. So his generation, he did not experience the word in exactly the same way that Moses' generation did, or exactly in the same way that our generation will. It's the same word, but each generation must arise and internalize that particular manna, and not just hear it with ears, but obey it. So this might explain again why Rachel stole Lavan's idols. She's a prophetess. We know that. Did she see in the future that a descendant would use magic, and she stole the idols to try to break that cycle? We don't know. We're not really told her reason for taking the idols. But you can see the contrast here. Like I say, there will be imitation on the side of evil to imitate what is holy. We know Abraham saddles his donkey early in the morning and sets out to pretty much complete that 10-test journey as it concerns Isaac. And Abraham is eager to perform the word because he knows through this particular action, life is going to come into the world. Isaac is the type of Messiah. Life is going to come out of what he's about to do. Bilam saddles his own donkey early in the morning and sets out, and he's trying to bring death into the world based on what's going to happen on this journey. For Abraham, taking Isaac's life would have taken the only wealth he cared about, other than Sarah. He would have given everything. What does Bilam want out of the deal? More loot than he's ever had before. Bilam's cursing, what is he trying to bring into the world? Death. So there's a list of Bilam's 10 tests. I'm not going to read it to you. You can read it later if you want to. But it concludes here with the last 3 altars. When he builds the 3 altars, he builds at Bamot Baal, he builds at Rosh HaPisgah, and at Rosh HaPeor. Each of those locations is what I'm going to look at. What we know is that from the time he was told don't go until the final altar there at Rosh HaPeor, Bilam is failing these hearing tests, and he's rebelling with each one. He rebels 10 times. Abraham is loyal through 10. Bilam rebels through 10. So to suggest this to us, where it says the angel of Yod He Vav He, it will occur 10 times in verses 22 through 35. And what made Bilam especially wicked is he didn't just practice immorality, he taught it. He taught others how to be wicked. But Abraham's the opposite. He says, I've chosen him that he may command his children and his household after him to keep the way of the Lord by doing righteousness and justice, so that the Lord may bring upon Abraham what he has spoken about him. Right? This is why Bilam keeps popping up even in the New Testament. There are people out there who will just teach you how to do the wrong thing. They will teach you immorality. This is worse than doing immorality. Teaching others to do it and doing it for a reward is a worse immorality. So why did the angel show up 3 times? And why are we going to have 3 altars? Well, each of these, remember, it's going to be a type of imitation of something. And so the threefold appearance, they say, symbolizes Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the ancestors of these 12 tribes that they're about to go look at. They're going to try to look at them. They're not going to be able to really see them. In fact, Bilam is going to say, one having his eyes uncovered. If his eyes were not supernaturally uncovered, he could have never seen what he saw in order to prophesy. Remember, they're in clouds of glory. The average person can't see in. They can go out. The Israelites can go out. That's what, if you read in the Torah, there's an activation phase. If you have to go out to war, he doesn't say take a bow, an arrow, or a spear, or a sword. He says take a trowel. How does Israel go to war? With a trowel. I have my trowel right here in the holster. Because if they left the clouds of glory, they would not be eating manna. They would be eating natural food of the land, which activated a digestive system that wasn't really necessary inside the clouds. It was a perfect food, just like his word is a perfect word. If you completely digest it, there's not going to be any refuse. Which part of the Torah would you kick out? But it's routinely done, right? They say, oh, this is refuge. Refuse. It's refuge, not refuse. But you go out in the world to make war, you will go into a natural state. And so you need a trowel to build these latrines for the army. When they come back in, you wouldn't need it anymore. That's why it activates at that point. But the Israelites had the ability to go in and out of the cloud. Remember, was it Moses that says, I no longer have the ability to go out and come in? Other leaders said that too. It's like the going out to war, going between those realms. They're like, okay, my time's up. I can't lead you out and in these realms anymore. But they said their enemies couldn't see them through the clouds. They knew they were there. Obviously, when they would follow them up, like they've just defeated Sihon, they've just defeated Og. How did they defeat them? Well, the giants were apparently pretty huge. But if you can't really see your enemy coming, just like Yeshua, he could walk through a crowd, nobody could see him. There was a special divine protection. But he says, okay, what if I lure them out of the cloud? What if I lure them out through appealing to their soul? What do people want? They want something good to eat. What do people want? Especially the young men. We're going to see why one of the altars was built basically focusing on the young men of war age. What the young men of that age want. Don't say it out loud. But it appeals to that. And that's where our youngsters are vulnerable, a certain age, because of the desire of the soul. It's good. In a marriage, outside of the marriage, you're entering into a dangerous realm. So the first one, there was room to escape. The angel appears, there's all sorts of room. He's in a field, he can go any direction here. And so they say it gives you options. If you want to curse, then why not curse the descendants of Ishmael or the sons of Keturah? Why do you have to go curse these 12 tribes? And then the second time he appears, they say that was the generation of Isaac. Okay, if you're dead set on cursing, why not curse Esau? Because there was only one way of escape when he appears the second time. The third time, there's no way to turn aside. And so that's the generation of Jacob. He's saying, no, I want to curse those people. I don't want to just curse a descendant of Abraham. I don't want to just curse a descendant of Isaac. I want to curse the descendants of Jacob specifically. And he says, okay, here's how this is going to go. And he's going to lead him right into his destruction. He's going to let him go on to Balak. So they build 3 altars. Again, in specific locations. And this is where the bribe comes in. They say this is where Balak understood he could reveal the nakedness of Israel to the Holy One, and maybe he would withdraw his protection. So the first place he took them was to the high places of Baal in Numbers 22:41. And it says he saw from there a portion of the people. They think what they saw was the tribe of Dan. And Dan has a long history with idols. They're pretty sketchy when it comes to the high places of Baal, a long history. And they said, okay, if I take and build an altar right here, revealing the tribe that's going to have the most history with idols, then that might convince him. I could bribe him to withhold his protection, and he would let me curse him, just like, I told him not to worship the Baals, and this tribe is going to do it. They're going to lead the way for everybody. He's like, no, that's not going to work. So that location didn't quite bribe him. And why 7 altars? They say it goes back to the 7 righteous ones who built altars. Adam, who built the first altar in Eden, which is going to be in the Midrash. Abel, who built an altar. Noah, who built an altar. Abraham, who built many altars. Isaac, Jacob, and Moses. And that is what led to the formation of these camps, these 12 camps in the camp that Balaam and Balak are seeing. Well, it doesn't say Balak saw them. He's aware of them. Balaam is the one who had his eyes uncovered. So what is he doing? He's reminding the Holy One of the 70 nations. Remember, 70 is symbolic of the nations. He says, accept these gifts from us. Take this bribe from the nation, and then you can just kind of shift all this honor you're heaping on these idol worshipers over to us, because we worship idols. They're going to worship idols. What's the difference? Didn't work, though. This was the designated doorway. If you're going to come in, you're going to come in through Israel. Think about Balak, a Moabite. His descendant, Ruth, a descendant of Lot, she is going to join the lineage of Messiah. She's going to come into Israel. If you destroy these people, you're going to destroy yourself. That's what the unclean thing doesn't tell you. You keep trying to destroy Israel, you're actually destroying yourself. Had they cut off Israel, where would Ruth have gone? Where would Messiah be? You see how short-sighted a sorcerer is? So he starts blessing instead of cursing. And next week we'll break down, based on the blessing, what was the curse he was trying to impose? He will tell you what the curse he wanted to say, because the understanding, his tongue literally got twisted, and he was forced to say the opposite of what he was trying to say. So from what he says, you can tell what he was trying to say and see if people are still doing that. Next, they go to Pisgah. Balak says to him, please come with me to another place from where you may see them, although you will only see the extreme end of them and will not see all of them, and put a curse on them for me from there. So he took him to the field of Zephim, to the top of Pisgah, and he built 7 altars and offered a bull and a ram on each altar. Again, Pisgah is also Mount Nebo. And if you've ever been with me to Beit Hogla, you know exactly where I'm talking about, because from Beit Hogla, you can look over, you can see Mount Nebo where Moses died. You can see down into the valley where Jericho is, and you can, of course, see the Jordan River from right there. And from here, he says he saw the extreme end. What is the extreme end? Well, he's pointing out the place where Moses is going to die. And if Moses is not with them, that's the end, right? No. Because remember the blessing, he says, the joyful shout of a king is among them. It doesn't matter if Moses dies on Mount Nebo. It doesn't matter if they haven't crossed the Jordan yet. It doesn't matter if the walls of Jericho haven't fallen yet, because specifically his blessing says the shout of a king is among them. And the note to that is where it says, Beturuat melech bo, it's meaning the shofar sound of the king is with Yehoshua. The shofar sound was not with Moses. That's not the end. The extreme end is Yehoshua, which is the long form of Yeshua. The shout of the shofar is with Yeshua. The resurrection is with Yeshua. It's not with Moses. And he's going to take them across the Jordan. He's going to gather them into the clouds of glory. So what is he saying? He's saying prophetically the end. And so what Bilam perceives as, oh my goodness, but then his eyes are uncovered. And he's like, oh, it wasn't about Moses, was it? It was about Yeshua. So to this day, you see people trying to obstruct Israel from crossing into the land. That's one of the curses he's trying to impose, to create obstructions to the people of Israel from crossing the Jordan and going into their land. And by extension, what would they try to do? They would try to curse the people of Adonai from crossing back into the Garden of Eden. That's the upper level of the message. And finally, Balak took Bilam to the top of Peor, which overlooks the desert. And the sin of Baal Peor is where the young men were seduced by the Moabite and the Midianite women. They ate things offered to idols, and then they began to engage into sexual immorality, which that's why it'll extend in the next week's Torah portion, Pinchas, because Pinchas will rise up. So what was the point here? We can see what sorts of obstructions he's trying to build through his curse. What he would like to curse in this third location is the next generation. He wants to take your kids, especially the ones of warrior age. If he can get your young men, especially, that's the third curse. And it's a powerful curse because you can see the residuals of this later in the time of Elisha. It's catastrophic when you can capture the youth. And we can see that in our generation. We're like, where did these kids go to school? What did they learn in high school? And when they go to college, if they go to a secular college, the majority, I don't know if there's any conservative faculty left out there. If they are, they're so little, they're probably just keeping their mouth shut to keep a job. So they're being indoctrinated at the college level, and unless they're truly prepared for that battle, it would be a battle. You have to send them into that battle with the proper weapons, including a trowel. Because there are going to be lots of stuff they need to bury out there. They're going to have to take it in, and they need to bury it as fast as they possibly can, because it's contrary to the word that has been preached to them. And so this one he builds with extra sacrifices. Do you notice that? He puts emphasis on the youth, the young men. And here's the thing, if he ruins the young men with this experience, and it's too vile to tell you the details of what they did when they worshiped Baal Peor, but the weirdness of it, it's simultaneously a fertility cult and a death cult. So why do you want to be fruitful if it's just going to kill the fruit? It makes no sense, like sorcery. So that brought the total of their sacrifices to 42. So what happens to young men, and I'll say also young ladies, who failed to learn from the previous generation? If they're disrespectful of the previous generation, if they fail to keep the covenant, if they practice immorality, they're going to fall. Now, it may be that they don't fall irreparably. We know that not all of the young men were killed after this particular incident, but some of them really embraced what was going on, so much so that they did it right in front of Moses. That's why Pinchas had to pick up the spear. It's possibly a residual, because in the time of Elisha, we know that he was called to the city of Jericho, which Joshua had cursed, by the way. He said, let this city never be rebuilt, and a curse on the person, on his offspring, on his firstborn and his lastborn, if he tries to rebuild this city. Now, if you've been to Jericho, you know that the city that was rebuilt was not exactly on the broken city. But still, there was a residual curse on the waters of Jericho. And so they call Elisha and say, can you do something? Because it's not just affecting the waters, even the fruit of the land is no good. And so Elisha goes, he throws salt in it, which represents covenant. There's something going on with the covenant here that should counteract it. He returns the waters to life. But as he's leaving to go to Beit El, we know that there were 42 young men, and they start following Elisha and insulting him. They're saying, okay, Baldy, you go up, you bald head. Well, they're talking about Elijah. Elisha received the mantle when he saw Elijah go up. They're mocking that. That passage is symbolic of the resurrection. The fact that, remember, he says, Elisha, you have to see me, or you won't get the double portion. You have to be able to see what I see. If you don't see it, you're not going to get the double portion. But Elisha saw him go up in the chariot. He receives the mantle. What is that? Elijah is associated with the resurrection. You have to see that the whole goal of this is to restore man back to the garden. If you can't see that, then you can't do what I did. Everything he did was associated with Messiah. Even in Jewish literature, if you want to know about Messiah, you read what they wrote about Elijah. He goes like hand in hand with the Messiah. And so they're not just insulting Elisha, go up, you bald head. They're also insulting Elijah. So they're blaspheming. And so somehow Elisha can look at these 42 young men and he says, there's no good fruit that's ever going to come out of this. So he pronounces the sacred name, and it says, suddenly a forest appeared, 2 she-bears came out of the forest, and they tore apart the 42 young men. So my question is, this residual of the curse of the 42 sacrifices? Or is it the residuals of Joshua's curse? I put them up there so you could compare the two. Says he went out to the spring of water and threw salt in it and said, this is what the Lord says, I purified these waters. There shall not come from there death or unfruitfulness any longer. The cult of Baal Peor was about fertility or fruitfulness, and it was also about death. So it could have been a residual from that, where the young men left the protection of the clouds of glory, and then they go out and nothing fruitful came out of that. In fact, if you want to figure out the 144,000 in the book of Revelation, you go back to that particular incident and do some math, and you'll come up with 144,000. And then Joshua 6:26, Joshua says, if you try to build this city of Jericho, you'll lose your firstborn when you lay the foundation, and you'll lose your youngest son when you set up its gates. So it's hard to, there's two things right there that make you think they could be connected to these 42 sacrifices. But even after these 3 locations, but these altars being built, what we know is if we obey our covenant, if we hear the voice, if we listen, then the fertility death cult has no power to poison our fruit. Those 42 young men, they were poisoned. They were in the city. And what happened when Elisha throws the salt into the water, somehow it just draws out the bad apples. I mean, what if you had a big barrel of apples and you knew some of them in there were rotten, but you didn't want to take out every apple? What if they would just jump out of the barrel? Pretty much what happens here. The bad apples jump out, they're drawn out, and then they're destroyed. So we'll wrap up right here. 3 particular passages that tell us about Balaam that confirm what the text is telling us. Revelation 2:14 says, I have a few things against you, because you have some there who hold the teaching of Balaam, who kept teaching Balak to put a stumbling block before the sons of Israel, to eat things sacrificed to idols, and to commit sexual immorality. We really have to guard our youth, because those 2 things go hand in hand. Jude 1:11 says, woe to them, for they've gone the way of Cain, and for pay. See the alternate altar there? The 7 altars built by the 7 righteous ones. Well, Abel built an altar, but these young men chose the altar of Cain. They've gone the way of Cain, and for pay, they have given themselves up to the error of Balaam, and they've perished in the rebellion of Korah. And then 2 Peter 2:13 warns us where we're liable to meet up with people like this, the last place we would expect to. He says they are stains and blemishes, reveling in their deceptions as they feast with you, having eyes full of adultery that never cease from sin, enticing unstable souls, having hearts trained in greed. Here comes the bribe, right? They are accursed children. Remember the 42 youths? Remember the young men that fell at Baal Peor? Abandoning the right way, they have gone astray, having followed the way of Balaam, the son of Beor, who loved the reward of unrighteousness. So, what's the lesson to us? We've got to figure out what our reward is. Because for every person it is, it's different. What does your soul crave so much that you might cut a corner here and there? You might become hard of hearing. It's not that you are hard of hearing, it's that you might make yourself hard of hearing in that area. And there is a specific connection here with children, young people. So we have to guard who our young people are with, who they're learning from. Who are they learning? You see, he kept teaching. Accursed children. Why? Well, because Balaam kept teaching them. There's some things you can't help. You live in the world, right? You can't come out of the world. But as parents and grandparents and spiritual parents, we do need to guard what our young people are being indoctrinated with. What is being taught to them over and over and over. And it doesn't mean you send them in there innocent. You have to prepare them for that battle because you won't always be there. But there's a payoff. And for your children, your grandchildren, your spiritual children, ask them to think about what's the thing you want most in all of the world. And don't say world peace. Okay. Miss America done got that one. What is it? Are they so engaged in sports that they've got eyes for nothing else? Is it performance? Is it knowledge? For a lot of these grown-up children, especially in Hebrew roots, we're addicted to knowledge because we want people to think we're smart. Or we want to think we're more righteous than someone else. No, we don't make those lists out for any, it's just not our job. We just have to walk in what he's revealed to us. And so for the grown-up children, I can't help you with your little kids, but for grown-up children, we have to ask ourselves, what is the payoff? Because if there's anything we're taking for ourselves that rightfully belongs to him, we can walk in a curse, not because anybody put a curse on us, but because we left the clouds of glory and forgot whose clouds they were. All of a sudden, we're surrounding ourselves with clouds of glory. That's a risk because knowledge puffs up. It makes you proud. And so the way I explained it, I guess, to my students this week was, think of it like the parable of the woman who lost the coin. And she swept and she swept and she swept and she looked for that coin and she looked for it and she found it. And then she goes out to her neighbors and she says, rejoice with me. Look, I have found this which was lost. This is the way we need to engage our learning with the world. If we can say, look at this treasure I found in the Torah this week. Rejoice with me. It was lost and I've recovered it. Look how beautiful this is. And if that gives glory to the Holy One, because you're saying, rejoice with me, not rejoice because I'm smart, not rejoice because I know the Hebrew Aleph Beit, not rejoice because I know the proper calendar or the proper dates or how you pronounce the name or whatever those things are. We tend to latch onto a topic because it makes us feel competent and secure. No, it's not that you can't research topics, you can. But you want people to rejoice with the treasure that you found. And not to look to you as the source, but the one who gave you the treasure. The glory belongs to him. And so it's not that we can't be happy when we find the treasures of the word. It's just that we have to be careful how people are perceiving what we found. That's a danger. Would you guys agree that if you could pass something on to the next generation, it would be that? Mm-hmm. So, okay, I'm going to have to say goodbye to our live stream audience right now. Thank you for joining us. And after I get home this afternoon, I'll take a look at what you put in the chat box there. And I want to remind you, next week, there will not be a live stream because we'll be at Revive. And we invite everybody to come to Revive and join us there. And you'll hear lots of good teaching, praise, worship. I'm sure they'll have some of the dance in the video, so forth. And if you can actually come on in. We'll be glad to see you. Shabbat Shalom.